Okay, well, I think we will get started here. So hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Adrienne, the Communications Manager here at the Non-GMO Project, and today we are very excited to host Carey Gillam. Carey is author of the Monsanto Papers, of which she'll be giving a presentation today, and the book was just published in March of this year. So Carey is an award-winning investigative journalist with more than 30 years of experience covering the food and agricultural policies and practices. And she has specialty knowledge regarding the rise of the biotech crop technology and the associated rise in pervasive pesticide use in our farming and food production systems. Carey is also the research director of US Right to Know, which is a nonprofit investigative research group focused on the food industry. So Carey's new book, The Monsanto Papers, covers the story of Lee Johnson's landmark lawsuit against Monsanto, and it was the first lawsuit in the world to prove the company's popular weed killer causes cancer. So Carey's going to walk us through that story and what she uncovered while researching that case. But before I turn it over to her, I invite you to leave comments and questions in the chat. So we'll be monitoring those. And then after she presents, Carey will answer a few of those questions. And then one more thing, as we noted, we'll be giving away 5 copies of the book. We'll put the sign up link in the chat and you'll have until midnight to sign up to win a copy. So now without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carey. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for sharing my work and sharing my book. I really appreciate that. I think this last year, we've all been through a lot with the global pandemic. We've seen a lot of hard times. We've learned a lot of lessons. I think we've learned particularly how fragile, our health really is. And I think it underscores, so much of the work that I do and the message of this book, that we have allowed ourselves, our world, our air, our water, our food, our bodies to become, poisoned with environmental contaminants and toxins like pesticides. And we need really to understand what's happening and try to do something so that we can, create a better future for our children. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. So I call this a conversation about accountability, really, cancer and accountability. Whoops. Oh, no. Oh, no. Let me see. Stop share. I'm back. Share screen. Share screen.
I had it for a second there.
There. Now, do you have it?
Oh, go ahead and try to. There we go. Okay, all set.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I am so not a good technical person. Call this a conversation about cancer and accountability. And I think, when it comes to accountability and protection of public health, there's just a real need for more accountability on the part of so many players, right? Corporations that are peddling these dangerous chemicals and products with little regard for human health, for environmental health, regulators that put protection of corporate profits over the protection of public health. We see that over and over again. And all of us who owe our children and their children and all the generations to come a healthier future. We have accountability as well. So this book really follows the story of one man, Lee Johnson. A lot of your viewers and followers probably have heard of him. He was, as you said in the introduction, the first person to take Monsanto to court, the first person in the world to challenge them on this idea that Roundup could cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Lee, is a man who suffered really horribly from non-Hodgkin lymphoma and a type that particularly manifests in his skin. He was a school groundskeeper, a father, he had 2 little boys, and it just really a very compelling character. I've gotten to know Lee quite a bit, and he's just really touched my heart. And so I've tried to make this book really a great deal of his own story and his struggle against cancer, his struggle against this corporation, his struggle to be a father, to his boys and not to give in to a terminal cancer diagnosis, told he had 18 months left to live. The book takes readers along with Lee as he experiences this accident at work when a large tank sprayer malfunctions and Lee is doused in this weed killer. He was a school groundskeeper, as I said, and big part of his job was to spray different types of weed killers around the Benicia School District. And you see him and you're with him when he has this accident and he's literally doused from head to toe in this. And then you follow along as he journeys to try to discover what has caused his cancer and what to do about it. So the story, is really also about Monsanto and its weed killer that many people know as Roundup. The active ingredient is glyphosate. I wrote a lot about this in my first book, Whitewash. That was much more of a science or academic book looking at the history of this, the use of the weed killer and the science surrounding it, showing the dangers. So there's a little bit of that in this book, but this book is really more a human story. But just to set the stage here, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, and glyphosate use has expanded rapidly from the mid-1990s. It's the most widely used weed killer in the world. It's used by farmers in agriculture. It's used on golf courses. It's used by homeowners on their lawns and gardens. It's used in city parks and playgrounds. The growth really was spurred in the mid-1990s. It's been on the market since the 1970s, but the growth really took off after Monsanto introduced genetically engineered crops that were specifically designed to be sprayed with glyphosate. This is just a little chart that shows you again sort of the dramatic rise in the use of this chemical from about 40 million pounds in the mid-1990s to about 300 million pounds now. This is just in the United States. Glyphosate is not only used with genetically engineered crops, it's sprayed directly over things like soybean and corn and cotton and canola and sugar beets, but it's also used by farmers who produce a whole array of other things. You can see here tomatoes, watermelons, wheat, tobacco, so many different crops and food that are a key part of our meals. This is a document that was put together by the EPA that I obtained several years ago. And glyphosate, as ubiquitous as it is particularly frightening because the World Health Organization shows it to be a probable human carcinogen. They found a particular association to non-Hodgkin lymphoma. They looked at about 1,000 different scientific studies trying to determine where it would fall in their classification scheme. And they looked at it and they looked at epidemiology, toxicology, other types of studies, but they found particularly strong evidence for genotoxicity, both in glyphosate by itself and the glyphosate formulations such as Roundup. So back to Lee. This is the particular type of cancer, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, that he has. As I said, it manifests in the skin. It's a mycosis fungoides. I just want to read a quick little section of the book here. The agony that this man has gone through is, I know cancer patients, cancer victims suffer incredibly, and Lee is really representative of that. So this is from chapter 10. Across the San Francisco Bay, lying in a narrow bed in the darkness of his apartment, Lee knew nothing about the courtroom drama surrounding the release of Monsanto's secret documents. His daily focus now was on surviving another day of pain. The doctors had warned Lee about the side effects of chemotherapy, the mouth sores, the nausea, hair loss, and fatigue. But the pain, no one had prepared him for the unrelenting agony that enveloped his body as the chemotherapy effects combined with the burning sensations that emanated from each of the cancerous lesions lining his limbs and torso. Every movement was nearly unbearable. Open sores on the back of Lee's head oozed onto his pillow each night, and his sheets were scattered with shredded skin each morning. Infection was a constant threat. He had already had more than one serious bout of infection settle into his wounds. Lee looked over at the clock and saw it was mid-morning. His bladder was about to burst, but rising and walking just a few feet to the cold linoleum-lined floor of the bathroom promised a torment Lee dreaded. It seemed a lifetime ago when he had bounded out of bed before dawn to get dressed for work and wake his boys for what had been joyously normal days. I'm going to strive, I'm going to survive, Lee repeated to himself. The mantra had become a self-directed pep talk that he invoked frequently. Everyone was so certain he was going to die from this disease, and he wanted so badly to prove them all wrong. So as Lee is fighting against his cancer. He also decides he wants to fight against Monsanto. And you meet these different lawyers who help him do this in the book. You meet Mike Miller here on the left, this guy from Virginia, who's sort of a good old Southern boy who's never taken on a chemical company, never taken on a pesticide case. Neither have these other lawyers here, Amy, Dave, Frank Wisner. Some people might have heard of him. He's become famous from the Roundup trials. But all of these lawyers are also core figures in this book, and you follow them as they build the case and they put their own money on the line and their reputations, and it really takes a toll. I learned in covering these cases on the lawyers who bring these mass torts, and so you take a deep dive behind the curtain of mass tort litigation in this book as well. These lawyers, one of the most important things that they did in preparing for trial, of course, was discovery, which is obtaining millions of pages of internal Monsanto documents. And I take you into the rooms with them as they're getting these first documents and they're sifting through them. And Mike Miller sees this email and he's just stunned. He thinks this is really pure gold. This is one of the first ones, and this came out at trial. But Donna Farmer, a leading scientist at Monsanto. Monsanto, of course, for years had said this can't cause cancer. This has been widely tested. We have all the regulatory authority backing us. There's no way our product causes cancer. And you see this internal email saying, we can't say Roundup's not a carcinogen. We've not done the necessary testing on the formulation to make that statement. And Mike Miller is just over the moon because he sees this very first email and he knows there's got to be plenty more. But this is something that the jury found stunning. I found stunning when I learned this, that the companies are not required by the EPA to do carcinogenicity testing on the formulations that they sell, long-term carcinogenicity testing. So that's a big part that comes out at trial. Ghostwriting. The other things that the lawyers saw in these internal Monsanto discovery documents was evidence of ghostwriting. And you see here, this is just something that it's not unusual. Sadly, there are many industries that engage in this, and it's always deemed to be very unethical. But this is what Monsanto was doing. And I'm not going to have time to go into great detail here, but this is another email that the legal team, Mike Miller and the others, discovered inside Monsanto's internal files. And they saw here that this scientist, Bill Heidens, was saying, we need to counter the International Agency for Research on Cancer. We need to discredit them. So what we need to do is we need to ghostwrite another scientific paper. We did this in the year 2000. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Wasn't only scientific literature that Monsanto was caught ghostwriting. This was something, was an article in Forbes magazine that was written purportedly, authored by an academic who had no connection, was not a Monsanto employee, but we learned through the internal documents that this article in Forbes was actually written by Monsanto PR people, again, to try to discredit the cancer scientists who were saying that its product was dangerous. Other examples that came out, Monsanto had hired organizations, a media house, to write op-eds and letters to the editor that would be supportive of glyphosate, supportive of its products and the company. But of course, they didn't want it to look like it was coming from the company. They wanted to look like it was coming from independent people. And they've done this with doctors and nutritionists and dietitians and farmers and a whole cross-section of people to look like they are independently supporting the safety of this chemical, when in fact we found out that they were being orchestrated by Monsanto. This is pertaining to GMO crops. This was another scientist inside Monsanto who wrote about, was talking about how they were safe, GMO crops were safe to feed to livestock. And he's written this paper, and now he's trying to find somebody who doesn't work at Monsanto to put their names on it. He's concerned the faculty members may not want to just take something they did not produce and slap their names on it. It's an unfortunate side effect of ghostwriting, I guess. Not everybody, it's not easy to always find people to participate. The documents also show us a whole array of questionable EPA interactions. And I wrote extensively in my first book, Whitewash, about EPA failings. More were seen in these documents that came out. There were documents that showed that the EPA worked very closely with Monsanto to try to stall a review of glyphosate, a toxicity review that a different federal agency wanted to undertake because they were concerned. Monsanto didn't want them to, and they reached out to the EPA, and the EPA quite happily helped them block this other review. This is more emails where they're talking about the EPA official, Jess Rowland, saying that he's going to help them. Jess has said to them, if I can kill this, I should get a medal. It's good to know Jess is onto this. There are a lot of emails that pertain to Jess Rowland and how helpful he will be in the defense of glyphosate, what a good friend he is to Monsanto. Jess happened to be the official who ran the cancer review of glyphosate at EPA. This is one of those I just talked about. Jess will be retiring, could be very useful. Got to flip through these fast. Front groups. We also saw in the documents the internal emails, and what I write about in the book is a lot of financing for third-party organizations who, again, will look to be independent and can shout from the rooftops how safe glyphosate is and how necessary it is to feed the world. Monsanto wanted them to look like they were independent of the company. Wanted it to be a secret deception on consumers and farmers and everyone else. This is one email. The American Council on Science and Health purports to be independent, sounds very sciencey and important. You can see you will not get a better value for your dollar than ACSH. This is an email Monsanto's writing after ACSH has asked for more money from Monsanto. This is a quote from judges overseeing the trial, a couple quotes you can see here. Monsanto made an ongoing effort to impede, discourage, or distort scientific inquiry. Judge Fabry says Monsanto didn't seem concerned at all about getting at the truth, whether glyphosate causes cancer. The Roundup product liability litigation, currently we're at about 100,000 US plaintiffs. All of these people allege that Roundup caused non-Hodgkin lymphoma and that Monsanto covered up the risks. There have been 3 trials so far. Last year, Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, agreed to pay about $11 billion to settle the majority of the cases. I'm going to run out of time, but I'm going to do a couple more slides. Cancer is way too common. Almost 40% of men and women in the US are expected to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes now. More than 600,000 died last year. Scientific research shows us a connection between pesticides and NHL, as well as all of these other health problems and cancers. Over 1 billion pounds of pesticides are used in the US each year. More than 90% of Americans have pesticides or their byproducts in their bodies. Sorry, I'm just flipping through here. Pesticides, the United Nations are calling for a comprehensive new global treaty to reduce the use of dangerous pesticides. They are so dangerous to human health. It's not just glyphosate, it's not just Monsanto. And of course, it's not just us humans at risk. There's just an abundance of evidence that we are affecting with our overuse of pesticides. We're affecting the insect population, we're affecting the bird population. The warnings of Rachel Carson from so long ago when she wrote about DDT and the silent spring that would come from indiscriminate use of pesticides, it's here. We are literally allowing the poisoning of our world. So the book, as I write on the dedication page, it's about Lee, it's about one man and his story, but it's really dedicated to all of the men and women stricken with cancer that I've come to know in the course of writing this book. And I say these people who have trusted me with their stories of suffering, fear, rage, and yes, hope, always hope. All right, so let me see if I can get stop share. All right, I'm back. Are we all still here?
Yes, thank you so much, Carey. Oh my gosh, that was wonderful. I can't imagine the amount of information you dug through also to uncover all those facts. And we didn't have a ton of questions in the comments, but we do have a few that it sparked for us. So we'd love to pose those to you here over the next few minutes.
Yeah, great.
So actually one question in the chat actually that we got is if this stuff is so dangerous, if glyphosate is so dangerous, why isn't the government protecting us from it? Just a big existential question there.
Well, gosh, so I could refer you to the New York Times article of yesterday. Sure. Just recently, there have been a whole series of articles that have come out, and I've written about this. This has gone on for, since the inception pretty much of the EPA. But there is abundant evidence that the EPA is subject to corporate capture, and it has been. And there is a whole structure within the EPA that works to protect large and powerful industries. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of money in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of power from lobbying organizations in particular when we're talking about Monsanto and glyphosate. CropLife International, CropLife America lobby very hard. And of course, we see a revolving door between industry and regulatory agencies. And one of the biggest problems, of course, is at the top of the agencies, EPA and others, you have political appointees. So there's unfortunately a very strong political component to our regulatory apparatus. And just within, as I said, the last couple of weeks, we've had 4 whistleblowers emerge from the EPA with new documentation, new allegations that their efforts to follow the science, to protect public health, to rein in use of dangerous chemicals has been blocked, censored. They've been subject to harassment, taken off of their jobs whenever they try to do their work to protect public health. And there, as I said, there's example after example that go back many, many years of the type of pressure that comes on these agencies. And, I mentioned in my slideshow, it's astonishing when you look at the emails, and I talk about these in my book, when Monsanto went to the EPA and said, we want you to help us block this review from this other federal agency. We're worried about what they're going to find if they look at the toxicity of glyphosate. You saw the top EPA officials jump. I mean, I looked at the timestamps on the emails and I'm like, man, they just emailed that guy like 45 minutes ago and he's already responding, and he's a top official at the EPA. And he's already responding saying, yeah, I'm on it, and it's really outrageous. Did that answer the question? Corruption, collusion, political pressure, revolving door. Money plays a really big role in Washington, D.C., I guess is the answer.
Oof. We've got another question. In the audience here. Let's see. Monsanto and others claim that Roundup is less toxic than herbicides and has resulted in an overall reduction of herbicide applications. So how do you respond to that?
So there are different ways to respond to that. So farmers used to use quite a bit, they still do to a certain degree, but a chemical called Paraquat as a weed killer. Paraquat is acutely toxic. It is deadly. On the EPA's website, it says 1 sip can kill. There's a skull and crossbones on the label. People know, farmers know that if they is mixing this up, there's a spill or a splash, if they ingest even like a half of a teaspoon of this, they can be dead within a matter of days. So yes, far more toxic on that acute basis than glyphosate. And so farmers, again, this was one of the selling points of glyphosate, that it was so much safer than other chemicals. I would argue that, there's a whole array of pesticides, and to say, well, this one causes cancer, but this one might cause Parkinson's disease, and this one might cause reproductive effects, which is worse? I don't know, I guess you can pick your poison, but atrazine, is another herbicide that's been associated with problems, in particular reproductive health problems. As I said, Paraquat, very acutely toxic, also associated on a long-term use basis with Parkinson's disease and other neurological problems. Glyphosate is associated in particular with non-Hodgkin lymphoma, as well as some liver, kidney, and other problems. We've seen some evidence, some scientific studies of poor birth outcomes with people who show large amounts of glyphosate, pregnant women in their urine. But I guess I would also argue, and I do in my book, it's the excessive use of glyphosate that is also a contributor. So the fact that it is used directly on food crops, the fact that we're exposed to it in our diet on a regular basis, the fact that our Department of Interior U.S. Geological Survey finds it very commonly in water and surface waters. It's even found in rainfall. So you have to consider exposure, the ubiquitous nature, the pervasive exposure in your risk calculations, along with studying whether it's acutely toxic or on a chronic basis and what types of disease it might contribute to.
Ooh, so that actually might lead into our next question. I think I'm going to try to interpret this correctly. So a question from the audience is, Canada is thinking about raising the levels, I think maybe the levels of use of glyphosate. And so the question being, how do we stop them? How do we thwart them?
Well, and you say levels of use. I wonder if they mean maximum, the MRLs, the tolerance amounts allowed in the food, or if they're talking about aerial spraying, or if they're talking about more desiccation. You know, there are a lot of ways that glyphosate is used in the world, which can be very harmful. The science has shown us both to human health and to environmental health. And so, yes, it is being sprayed aerially, for forest management, which is of great concern to a lot of people. It's being used not only on GMO crops, but also as a desiccant, particularly in Canadian wheat growing areas and oat growing areas, where it's sprayed directly on these crops shortly before they are harvested. You know, and I've written about government documents that show us really high levels that our scientists at our FDA have found of glyphosate in oats, for instance, in baby food oatmeal. And honey and that sort of thing. I guess to answer your question, what can you do about it? I mean, the answer always is, educate yourself, inform yourself, and then engage, and so if you're concerned, you need to engage and find groups or other like-minded people who want to reach out and make a change. And I've seen so many, there were college students in the area where Lee Johnson worked as a school groundskeeper, and where his trial was held. And when they saw this evidence, they said, we're going to go to our school, our college, and say, don't spray this anymore on the ground. We don't want it sprayed. And they did that, and they got it banned from the school. And you've seen people in New York City that have engaged with their leaders, and you've seen glyphosate and other pesticides now banned from public spaces. So it just really takes, I think, community awareness and decision making. And there are a lot of grain handling companies that bring in things like oats and wheat, who've started saying to the farmers, we're not going to take your grain if you spray it, if you desiccate, if you spray it directly with glyphosate right before you harvest it, because consumers don't want that. So I think it's education and engagement, right?
And just on that note, do you have any quick tips for engagement? I think you spoke to it a little bit, but just any ways that people can engage, or is it regional specific?
You're probably more of an expert than I am in that, because I don't get out and march. I don't lobby. I don't send petitions. I'm doing just the fact gathering, I guess, the fact finding and the fact sharing. But as I said, I've come across so many organizations, and I can certainly, people who have emailed me and asked for that, I share. They're great organizations doing so much work around the world, actually, to try to do that, who are smarter than I am. I just worry about what I buy for my family and writing books.
Great. Okay, and maybe we'll wrap up with this last question from the audience. So it's just a quick, what about Roundup Ready seeds? But the question being, how do we know 100% that the seeds we buy do not have Roundup on, or are not really Roundup Ready seeds, I think is ultimately the question.
Right. Well, if you're buying Roundup Ready seeds, you're going to be paying a premium and you're going to be, the companies have patented these products and they make a lot of money off of them and they control the distribution and the sales on a pretty tight basis. So, I guess I don't know what the answer to that is other than if you're talking about Roundup Ready soybeans, if you plant a crop and you spray it with glyphosate and it doesn't die, it's Roundup Ready, I guess, right?
And I do believe that that would be on the industrial level as well, not your typical
Yeah.
seeds.
They haven't, I mean, if you're talking about things like Monsanto is the world's, well, it's owned by Bayer now, but it is the world's largest seed company, and it was before Bayer bought it. It not only owned a lot of the seed and germplasm for, agricultural row crop farming, but also they bought vegetable seed companies. So at the time that they were purchased by Bayer, they owned a lot of, lettuce and peppers and, watermelon and things like that. But they were not working on trying to make that necessarily Roundup Ready, trying to do other things with that.
Great. Well, thank you so very much, Carey. We really appreciate you joining us today. And we appreciate everyone in the audience. If you would like to receive newsletters from US Right to Know, we put that link in the chat, so go ahead and check that out. And so until next time, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Carey.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.